Good evening, everyone. Happy Black History Month, and welcome to the second event in celebration of Mamas, Martyrs, and Jezebels, myths, legends, and other lies you've been told about Black women. Mamas, Martyrs, and Jezebels, myths, legends, and other lies you've been told about Black women revisits notions of Black womanhood to include the ways in which Black women's perceived strength can function as a dangerous denial of Black women's humanity. This collection addresses the stigma of this extraordinary endurance in professional and personal spaces, the Black church, in interpersonal partnerships, and within the justice arena, while also giving voice and value to Black women's experiences as the backbone of the Black family and community. In this event, contributors to the section of the book dedicated to the theme Mind will discuss their work. Our moderator is Dr. Clarissa West White, who wrote the introduction to this section and who is one of the anthology's editors. Dr. Clarissa West White is the university archivist, assistant professor at Bethune-Cookman University in Daytona Beach, Florida. A native of Quincy, Florida, she has degrees in creative writing, curriculum and instruction, English education, and information from Florida State University. Dr. West White has experience as a middle and high school English teacher, program coordinator, adult literacy director, university English department chair, an assistant professor and adjunct at a number of public and private universities in the state of Florida and online. She has completed archival projects and served as an education consultant with the U.S. and Florida Department of Education. She has received fellowships, a number of fellowships, and scholarships, including the Robert Frederick Smith Internship, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, Smithsonian Institute, Teacher and Librarian Scholarship recipient, Key West Literary Seminar, National Information Standard Organization Plus Scholarship recipient, Preserving Digital Objects with Restricted Resources Institute recipient, and she has a Fulbright A's to Turkey. She enjoys marrying community activism with literature, art, and education. She has presented to local, state, and national audiences about English instruction, teacher training, teaching pedagogy and methodology, issues concerning African American women, and most recently, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. Our panelists are Marissa Boglin, Kenneth Dalrymple, Sierra Glasgow, and Yvette Green. And I'll read each panelist's bio from the anthology. Marissa Boglin is a native of, please correct me if I'm wrong, Bessemer, Alabama. She is the mother of a teenage football prodigy and does not shy away from teaching him the importance of writing. She studied creative writing at the University of North Alabama and is currently a PhD student studying composition, rhetoric, and English at the University of Alabama. Marissa is also an adjunct writing instructor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, UAB. Outside of her formal education in writing, she also holds a Bachelor of Arts in Healthcare Administration and a Master of Arts in Organizational Management. When she is not writing, she enjoys cooking and home decorating. Our next panelist is Kenneth Dalrymple. Kenneth Farrell Dalrymple is an emerging Trinidadian American writer with a flair for thought-provoking storytelling. A quarterfinalist in the Screencraft 2017 Cinematic Short Story Contest. His work is forthcoming in The Amistad, The Experiment Will Not Be Bound, an experimental anthology of American writing by Unbound Edition Press, The Courtship of Winds, and others. Our next panelist is C.R. Glasgow. C.R. Glasgow, DOC, she, doc, she, we, is a non-binary queer, first-generation Afro-Caribbean American serving as healing artist, poet, and speaker. C's work has been sponsored by fellowships and craft shops across or through UCross, VONA, VONA, The Watering Hole, Hurston Wright, and Anaphora Arts. The work is in deep commitment to the interiority and sonics of Black, queer, Woman X, WOMXN, centering themes of memory, death, rebirth, non-duality, and the cosmos portals. Their chapbooks, The Devils That Raised Us, was longlisted by Frontier Poetry. C's work has appeared in or is forthcoming from Lion's Roar, Obsidian, Moco Caribbean Art and Letters, Torch Literary, and Rigorous. Read more on C's work at claudelglasgow.com. Our last panelist, definitely not least, is Yvette Green. Yvette Green is originally from Nashville, Tennessee, yet she has grown to love go-go music, a wonderful byproduct of living in the DMV for 20 plus years. Two sons make her a proud mother and a better, more patient human. Yvette is a graduate of Xavier University of Louisiana and University of Maryland, College Park. Her work has been published in Saloon, Slate, Viator, Seasons of Our Lives, Winter, award-winning stories from women's memoirs, Midnight and Indigo, 45th Parallel, among others. You can read her work at YvetteGreen.com.
Hi there. Sorry, before we get started, I was supposed to be a panelist. I don't know how I got left off, but hopefully I can still join.
Ophelia Brooks.
That's me.
Hi, Ophelia Brooks.
Hi.
Our final panelist, let's try that again. Our final panelist, definitely not least, is Ophelia Brooks. Ophelia Brooks is a Black, I don't know how to say it, Latine, first-generation writer and lawyer. She can be found on Instagram and X at Ophelia Brooks, Esquire, ESQ, and at Ophelia Brooks, Esquire.com. Her recent work appears in Electric Literature, Catapult, Cutleaf, and Drunk Monkeys. We'll head off our program today with an initial reading and introduction by Dr. Clarissa West White. Then each panelist will read sections from their works in the anthology. Then we'll get to the discussion portion of the event. As always, audience members are encouraged to join the discussion using the chat function. Audience members are also urged to mute their mics so that we can have seamless conversation and few interruptions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Clarissa West White.
Thank you. Good evening. So I came to this project after having a conversation. The four of us had lunch on several occasions, and we had these conversations, dynamic conversations, because each of us holds, multiple roles in our lives. We're mothers, daughters, spouses, exes, dated, single ladies dating, uh, church faith-filled women, women of different faiths. And our conversations still showed very strong threads throughout our narratives. And so we toyed around. At first, we were thinking of doing a podcast. And then I received an email because I'm on the list of Black Lawrence Press from years before, when I was trying to help students who had chapter books think about where they could publish or submit for competition. And so I still retained their reading list. And so every so often I would receive emails about book proposals. And it just so happened that maybe a day after we had one of our lunches, I saw the call in the email. And so reached back out and said, hey, this looks pretty simple. Like a proposal, there's 4 of us. It wouldn't take that long. And so that's kind of how we came to this. And my part in the chapter of mind, at the same time we were doing this, my mother began showing signs of memory lapse, memory loss, cognitive decline, and she was shortly diagnosed with dementia. And so that, because she was always so healthy, always so active, it just threw me. It still has thrown me. And so I thought Mind was the perfect place for women of color to talk about the stresses and traumas of trying to do it all. Sometimes alone, sometimes with a husband or a spouse or a significant other, sometimes with a community, sometimes without. And so that's one of my primary reason for choosing Mind. So I'll read my introduction. As a daughter of a dementia-laden octogenarian, I know the importance of mental health. I recall my mother's early observations as she realized something was not as it should be. Getting old is a blessing, but it is certainly inconvenient. Unfortunately, it is not just aging that causes our mental health to diminish, but being Black, female, and overburdened can lead to fractures. Often without self-care and reflection, symptoms go unnoticed, critical interventions are not applied, and chanting, "You got this," is not a suitable course of action. The stories within this chapter prove that not all experiences need be repeated generationally. They provide quick glimpses in the mirror for each of us to continue to maintain a positive and healthy mental state. And we all included a playlist with our introduction. I implore you to listen to all 11 because I think they really do provide encouragement always, not just in these times, but in all times. So with that, we'll start with Marissa Boglin, and Ophelia Brooks will be second, and then we'll move on alphabetical order. I will let you know that at the end of your reading, I will ask 2 questions of each person. And then at the end of the final person, Yvette Green, we'll open it up for discussion across the platform. Ms. Boglin.
Hello, I just want to thank everyone for joining the panel today. Just a preface of this, before I read this essay, I wrote this when I was a master's student at the University of North Alabama, and I was told to write a creative nonfiction. It was such a vulnerable piece that I never imagined it would be published. One of the requirements of the assignment was that we submit the writing for publication. And I just never imagined that I would be here today. So this is a very vulnerable piece of writing, but I am pleased to share this with you all. This is Unreal Reality. My new home reminded me of my childhood. 7 years entombed were my post-high school fantasies of attending Skigi and becoming an architect. I was an only child born to an only child. So, of course, my overprotective mama had been uncomfortable with me attending college 3 hours away from her reach and was unsure how I would adapt to the rustic isolation of Macon County. Walking in, I only noticed the house's aesthetics because of my obsession with architecture. Most people would likely ignore such granular details. An inherent passion for architecture and drawing was the reason I wanted to attend Skiggy anyway. The owners, two white men, told me once that they purchased my 20s era bungalow in conjunction with the fixer-upper they called home. Whenever I went to pay the couple my rent, I wondered why they painted their out of place 19th century antebellum home, which they more than likely purchased from the Jefferson County delinquent tax list, with the best paint that they could find, but painted the brown paneled walls of the White House they rented me in that predominantly black pocket of Bessemer, Alabama, a discounted flat paint of a mess. I thought of my maternal grandma, Lily Mae, who had pridefully walked across hardwood floors that needed a proper finishing, and her faded bargain town housecoats with pockets, bragging that her last husband got her walls done for her in the 70s. She didn't care, up until she died in 1999, that those walls were an eyesore. Outside of hanging in shot houses on Friday nights with friends who still lived in the city and spending Saturday nights guzzling down aristocrat and taco vodka that kept me in one of their spare beds all Sunday morning, I had abandoned my hometown. My mama, too, had discarded Bessemer, although we did not do it intentionally. Bessemer is a large city. It has a Walmart supercenter, an amusement park, many subdivisions filled with brick homes from the 50s and 60s, and even a branch of the city's R1 teaching hospital, the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Despite its size, the culture still mirrors a small town in the Black Belt. Everybody knows everybody's family, and everybody knows everybody's business. Bessemer is a place that holds on to your past like a toddler refusing to abandon a pacifier. If you're trying to move on from past negative memories, it's not the place to be. For my mom and me, that was losing the matriarch of the family, my grandmother. So, with a newborn son, I was 25 years old and back in the hometown of both my parents and me. I looked around that disaster of a house with disdain. Not only because I spent my entire paycheck to pay the deposit and the first month's rent and didn't have 2 pieces of light bread to rub together, but also because I realized that all my dreams had failed. Maybe leaving the city after I graduated in 2001 from the city's only public high school, just Lanier High School, had been counterproductive. What had I accomplished other than dropping out of the forced confines of my mama's alma mater, Miles College, and becoming the unwed mother to a child whose pseudo father was my sole reason for returning to the place that I wanted to forget? My new home was streets away from the area known as the Field, where my grandmother's house once was. Over a decade past her death, I could still smell her Virginia Slims and her Schaefer beers, and I could hear Denise LaSalle blasting from her 45 player, warning some man not to mess with her toot-toot. If I drove close enough, I could hear the 18-wheelers and the impatient cars thrusting down Interstate 2059, which, I once learned, was the primary reason the field was no longer the field. Thinking of my grandma and where I grew up reminded me of penny candy cigarettes that blew false smoke and frozen cups we call bebops from a neighborhood woman that capitalized from her food stamp allotment. Moving back did give me a sense of nostalgia, I guess. I was on the street with more abandoned buildings than inhabited ones, chasing a man who had set up shop with the woman he really loved in the housing project down the road, blocks down the road. He was not my son's father, and I knew it, but I gave my son his name anyway. In retrospect, I regretted that decision because it was made on an emotional impulse at the hospital after his biological father rejected his arrival. I made the most of that little white cottage sandwiched between a state-funded childcare facility and a row of shotgun houses all boarded up with tarps and graffitied engineered wood that probably housed an entire family with multiple kids when the Pullman housed its Black workers. I did not know anything about planting flowers, but the woman at the yellow daycare across the street noticed me struggling in the weeds that bordered the cracking concrete porch. My newborn son, Joe, was in his hospital-provided carrier, cackling at the mosquitoes swarming around him in the stifling central Alabama August heat. The woman yelled from across the street, "Hey, ma'am, you ain't gonna grow nothing in all them weeds. And ain't that baby hot?" She took the back of her hand and wiped her face. Her cinnamon-colored synthetic wig drifted from its place. I took Joe's bottle of Similac and propped it in his mouth. I'd gotten a pink and white blanket from the hospital that held the bottle in place. He was more interested in laughing at the air than soothing the thirst. "I'm fine," I yelled. I was the $3 yellow pansies in my bare hand with my bare hands into the dirt. The unhealed smiling scar under my bikini line was still crying, yet I still collected the clay, rock, and sand mixture from the earth under my fingernails. "Just trying to make my boy feel at home," I told her. "Well, he just a baby," the woman sang. "He don't even know where he at." When I glanced up at her long enough to study her, she looked to be in her early 40s. I looked at Joe and smiled. It might have been in my mind, but he smiled back. "He know where he at," I said. "He see these flowers his mama trying to plant." "Well," the woman sighed. She waved at one of the parents that left with her toddler. "You let me know how that goes for you. And you know I take child care resources." "Well, ma'am," I said sarcastically. I was slightly offended that she assumed my son and I were drop dead poor since she didn't see a man. "I actually work for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama." My knees became uncomfortable from the wedging in the wet grass. I wanted to see her expression. I bet she wondered why, out of all places, would I choose to live on a street where most of the houses were condemned and crack fiends wandered dreamily along the sidewalk in search of their next hit. When she gave me a blank look that lingered for a few seconds, I sat there wondering what drove me to that White House with no hallway in a botched flip job. Maybe it was those painted panel walls covered with miscolored returned paint reminded me of my childhood. But no, after a few moments, I realized what it was. I was chasing behind a reality that wasn't even real.
Thank you so much. I have to ask, what did you get on the assignment?
You know what? I don't remember.
It wasn't one of
Okay.
those, if it's published, you get an A in the class automatically.
But it was so much longer I think got published, so I think I got an A though.
Okay. I think you should have. I think you
Well,
should have.
thank
You're not.
you. Thank you.
Yes. Being an only child, I wonder how you view what is happening to you in this story. Like, have you ever wished or you thought the pain would have been lessened if you had had siblings to share it with, or even if your mother's parenting would have been different had she had siblings?
Um, I would say so because as an only child, I deal with a lot of things as an introvert that most people, when they are surrounded by siblings, they can handle, gauge, get more advice from their siblings. But I kind of deal with things on my own. So when I was dealing with this situation, it just felt like me, myself, and I, and I'm so accustomed to handling things that way. So
And looking back, how do you how would you summarize or think about how, moving back home, because we often think of that as a step backwards to move forward. Like, how do you still process that?
well, I appreciate those times because they actually being in that situation and living in that house just really made me want more out of life, and it kind of pushed me to level up my life, that this was not a permanent situation for me. So in retrospect, looking back, that was the best decision that I could have ever made, because I feel I would have been stagnant had I just remained where I was, because at the time when I became pregnant with my son, I lived in a better part of town. And I've actually moved to a worse part of town to, run behind this guy. So I think that was the best decision for me because it kind of motivated me to go pursue higher education and I'm almost done with my PhD. So, I'm pretty glad that I was put in situations that kind of forced me to grow up. You're muted.
I'm sure the audience will have additional questions when everyone reads. Thank you, thank you. Our next reader will be Ophelia Brooks.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm a big fan of all the panelists, and your essays in this book were really amazing, and I'm honored to be in it with you. This piece is called On Giving Dancing One More Chance. I learned at college parties how Black people were supposed to dance. We were to grind, freak, twerk, whine, mimic sex with our clothes on the beat. I know how to dance like that. No one had ever shown me. Despite being Caribbean and fans of hip-shaking soca music, my older sisters and aunts never danced like that. My mother and grandmother definitely never danced like that, even as soca classics like Nanny Wine played throughout the house and instructed us in Creole to wind down low, wind down so. I spent the rest of college and the rest of every party I've ever been to wanting to dance with my college crush to One More Chance. I saw dancing as approval from him or some later iteration of him, and confirmation that I was attractive to men and acceptable to Black people. So I endeavored to become a good dancer. Embarrassment and an entry-level salary kept me from signing up for any in-person dance classes. Instead, I turned to YouTube's cornucopia of dance tutorial videos. I couldn't keep up with any instructors my age, mid-20s, so I scoured for videos tagged for older women, and even most of those proved too tricky. My few achievements came from tutorials for elderly Black women with joint problems. Once, during another practice session, I clicked on a routine to Missy Elliott's Work It. I was back in high school, riding around town with my basketball teammates and listening to the radio. When we heard the record scratches at the beginning of Work It, we yelled the opening lines. DJ, please pick up your phone. I'm on the request line. One of my teammates, Sonia, barked at me, dance, show us how you freak dance. I didn't know what she was talking about, which must have shown plainly on my face. She started illustrating next to me in the back seat, rolling her upper torso and sticking out her butt. I tried to follow along, and it was dark enough for her to think I was doing the same movements. I was not. Months later, Sonia and I were dancing with our dates at the high school prom. My date and I faced each other, me seesawing along to 2003's most popular songs. When In the Club by 50 Cent blared through the venue, my prom date told me to turn around. I obeyed. I stood straight up, then wavered while trying to find and stay on beat. I muttered encouragement to myself. You're doing fine. You're doing fine. I was not doing fine. A minute into the song, my date pulled away. I turned around as he leapt behind Sonia. She rolled her torso and stuck her butt out without skipping a beat, just like on our car ride. My prom date's pelvis dipped up and down, lower and lower. Sonia's pelvis followed in sync. A crowd formed around them and cheering erupted. I stuck my neck out to get a glimpse. They were on all fours in a pose I later learned from yoga was called bridge. Sonia was on top, their pelvises still in lockstep. I looked on with envy. After prom night, I confronted my date about abandoning me. He shrugged. You just didn't dance freaky enough. His answer seemed absurd, but I had no comeback. I retreated and went back to class. A yearbook photo captured the prom crowd on the dance floor. There I was, my head a few inches taller than my date's, not facing him, dancing. My mother saw the photo and reprimanded me. Girls shouldn't be dancing like that. My dancing was freaky enough for my mom, apparently. In my early 30s, I got engaged to my boyfriend, the first and only white man I ever dated. My attention turned to planning the wedding reception. For every reason that I wanted to have dancing at the reception, I thought of a reason that I didn't want to dance. I wanted to dance at the reception because I love the music associated with dancing. The songs are irresistible. They make even my naturally disinclined body move. When the beat drops on Back That Ass Up by Juvenile or Get Low by Lil Jon and the East Side Boys, it is impossible not to do as the songs entreat, even if not particularly well. I also wanted to dance because I assumed no one would judge the bride's ability to dance well. Anyone judging would at least have the decency to do so out of my earshot. Finally, I wanted to dance at the reception because I knew the groom would be a considerate dance partner who would not abandon me like my prom date. for many reasons, not the least of which is because I didn't dance freaky enough. But I didn't want to dance at the reception because I could not take the pressure of all eyes on the bride. In addition, I never liked dancing in front of white people. It felt like allowing them into a space that they had not earned the privilege to enter. I also didn't want to dance because I couldn't dance the only way I knew how, closing my eyes and doing what my body wanted. My fiance had the luxury of dancing like no one was watching, because no one was watching. By contrast, I could never dance like no one was watching, even when no one was actually watching. Alone at home, I heard my prom date or my college crush or Sonia. I even heard my well-intentioned fiance encourage me to relax my shoulders when I got stuck out on the dance floor at an all-white wedding, and I couldn't beeline fast enough out of there, so I stayed for a few tense two-steps. I thought of all the unsolicited instructions I collected over the years, like counting on 2 and 4, bending my knees, and moving my hips in a figure-8 motion. Or I thought of all the on-body adjustments my male dance partners made over the years, whether requested or not. I thought about mimicking any Black woman I ever saw dancing in real life or on screen. Even alone, it felt like at least 100 people were watching. I grew up in adversity and knew conquering obstacles required facing them. I decided I should dance at my wedding reception. I could do this. I wanted this. I deserved this. Ever the good student, I was high school valedictorian after all. I decided to keep my goals small and address a couple of areas in the weeks before the wedding. There would be line dances or recent dance challenges. I brushed up on the ones I knew: the wobble, Cupid shuffle, the electric slide, swag surf, and the last 5 minutes of Beyonce's Get Me Bodied. I learned new ones and practiced them over and over again so that I could be sure to remember them while drunk. I studied my body in the mirror. I made my own on-body adjustments. Hands here, shoulders like this, butt like that. During a final practice session, I focused on learning an elderly dance troupe's routine to a Black wedding classic, Before I Let Go by Frankie Beverly and Mays. Hours in, I started to have fun. Even though it was difficult, try after try, I was getting it. I stopped scowling at myself when I messed up and laughed instead. When I closed my eyes and let my muscles remember the moves, I heard no instructions, suggestions, or voices, not even my own. I felt the music, and it felt good. That's the end.
Thank you so much for that. That was awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The notion of seeking others for validation just kept coming to me when I read this, and how we seek it, usually about things like work, feeling like maybe we're not good enough for something, or it has to be something monumental. So for me to read how much dancing or your perceived lack of ability of really like was internalized to the point where you went through a whole lot of self-talk. Like, so what was it that really kind of shifted so that you didn't need outside gaze to validate your dancing ability, which I think is, of course, alludes to other issues too, right?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think I was able to eventually, not seek external validation or even internal validation for this particular thing when I just stopped caring about how I looked or what other people thought. And it took a long time for me to do that. And I still don't even know that I'm doing it that well. I just came back from Cuba and there was a dance party and I stood on the wall and watched. But every time, I think it's a learned language for me to feel embarrassed about not being a perceived good dancer. But I really try to challenge myself every time those voices come up, whether they're mine or other people's, and just try to, put that aside and have fun. And I always have fun every time that I challenge myself to do that. So.
Yeah, I like your candor in saying that you're not even sure if you're still over this, so to speak, because we often tell young ladies, young people, oh, just ignore the crowd. Just go for it. Just do it. Just, we tell 10-year-olds that, we tell 15-year-olds that, 20-year-olds. And I don't think it's that easy. Like it can't be, because so many people still carry this feeling of like, I'm not good enough at something throughout their lives. Like it's so hard. I read a lot of stuff that says, oh, just write down your thoughts or put it in a balloon and let it float away and then go, all this, but it can't be that simple. What would be your advice for young adults who have some angst about something, their ears, their eyes, the way they dance, the way they talk?
My advice to young people would be that a chant I always say to myself is everything you need, you have inside. And so I really would encourage young people to feel like, or to understand that they're perfect the way that they are, whether they look like, what they dance like, what they do for work, what they, their hobbies. All of us are perfect the way that we are. And later in the piece, I talk about how dancing is kind of innate, I mean, everyone has a natural rhythm to their body, and that really is what dancing is. And I think that is a metaphor for life, in that there are so many things about us that we think we need to change to be more perfect, but everything that we have already, from the time we were born is enough. And so I encourage folks to do that. And I also encourage people to, if you have any qualms about dancing, just take dance lessons. It would have been great if I would have done it at age 10. But it's still on my list of things to do, is to take some dance lessons, probably private lessons, so that there aren't too many witnesses.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll have, please correct it when you introduce yourself, Dalrymple.
Yeah, that's close enough. That'll work. Oh, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kay Farrell Dalrymple. My piece, The Handbag, is a work of short fiction. And today I will read to you until paragraph 1 of page 81. The Handbag. You do know, darling, the Vuitton in Louis Vuitton has 2 T's. Christina Bullock held up 2 bony fingers, as though Estelle couldn't count. The insult, like a backhand slap, struck Estelle silent, and Estelle wasn't no silent type, especially in a crowd. South LA born and raised, Crenshaw through and through. She was small and feisty like a badger. That's what T called her, honey bee for honey badger. Even though he was on the receiving end sometimes, he loved her feistiness. He loved them thick thighs and that big old ass, the snappy comebacks and sharp tongue, that boisterous, satisfied laughter. Now a similarly abrasive sound of laughter that wasn't Estelle's had her thinking, fuck you, bitch, as Christina Bullock and her pack of hee-heeing hyenas sauntered off. It burned like salt in a wound. And pardon Estelle for thinking it highly inappropriate that women behave this way about a handbag at a PTA meeting at Mother Mary Catholic in the Hills, mind you. Them rich bitches must don't know how to act, I see. Estelle was atop the church steps, eyes closed, breathing in deep and fighting to keep it cordial. I'm from motherfucking Crenshaw, ho, she finally broke, long after Christina Bullock and her pack were gone. What you said, Ma? Marcus, soaking wet after fishing quarters out the church fountain, asked. Estelle snapped. I said keep your black ass out that goddamn fountain, boy. You know these Catholic motherfuckers don't play with their money. The shadow of the church steeple stretched east as the sun set. Estelle glanced up at the towering stone cross, suddenly aware she stood in front of the house of God. Come on, she said, grabbing Marcus by the shirt collar. I don't need to get caught roaming Crenshaw after dark. The Beverly Hills air had a synthetic smell, kind of like new money. Subconsciously, Estelle always found herself breathing in deeper and more frequently, trying to catch the I got money contagion. The town was all manicured lawns, flower-filled gardens, circular driveways with luxury cars, and spouting fountains caged inside of mansion gates. Crenshaw, with its graffiti-tagged walls, potholed avenues, and abandoned buildings, was more concrete jungle. Estelle was willing to put up with the provocation of these rich types to a point. After all, it was second nature for the haves to look down upon the have-nots, she figured, and Marcus attending this school in this town was about having better opportunities. Best she set aside her wounded pride. That insult, though, them uppity heifers was gonna pay for that insult, but not here and not now. This was the place and time for civility, Estelle knew. Besides, it was only Marcus's first semester at the private school. Can't have white folk in Beverly Hills thinking black folk from Crenshaw is uncivilized. Won't be no coming back from that. Shit. She could already hear T's mouth in her head, going, going, going like the Energizer Bunny. She'd be explaining how their son got kicked out of a good Catholic school 'cause she had to check her bitch. And he'd be telling her, you know them folks still ain't forgive us for OJ, and asking, why, oh, why couldn't you just shut the fuck up? Nah, she won't give him the satisfaction. 11 years of marriage, Estelle knew better. LA traffic wasn't so bad after the sun had set and the smog was clear. Two of the reasons Estelle didn't mind a drive across town for PTA meetings. Making a good impression as a responsible and present parent was important to her, and she wanted something more than Crenshaw for her son. Simply dodging bullets and gangs wasn't good enough for Marcus. Only impacting the world beyond their communal trap would suffice. Driving home in silence, Estelle recalled how the idea of Marcus attending Mother Mary Catholic came about. There wasn't enough money to buy 2 iPhones, so Estelle had gotten Marcus the sleek and new iPhone and herself the used and bulkier Android. What had he done? Not but a week later? Destroyed the damn thing. Took it apart to investigate the engineering. T used his big body to shield Marcus from her belt, Estelle running around, huffing and puffing and yelling, come here, let me get him one time, just once, please, T. She was fixing to give him one hell of a whooping. Lord knows if she'd gotten a hold of the boy, she'd have whooped that math and science shit out for good. Marcus, Estelle said, finally winded, if you knew that's what you wanted to do, why couldn't you do that shit to the Android and let me have the iPhone? This belt, it's going to teach you the value of things, boy. Keep playing with me. After calming down, Estelle realized something. Marcus's reality wasn't a big enough world for his inquisitive mind. She had to help him find a place where his brain could expand. He couldn't do that in Crenshaw. It wasn't that Estelle was ashamed of being from Crenshaw, by the way, far from it. But it was true, what she'd always bragged to her girlfriends. The boy's just smart, and I don't know where he get it from. Sure as hell ain't got it from T, Estelle mumbled, her car idling at the red light on Crenshaw and Slauson. The evening couldn't be more humid. Night didn't bring a bit of coolness. The AC in her Ion was being stubborn and kept fogging the windshield, and she'd had it up to here with Christina Bullock and her gang. Yeah, that's what they were, a fucking gang. This bitch been trying me for the longest. Earlier in the semester, when Estelle was new to the PTA group, she tried making nice by bringing snacks for the meeting. Oh, Estelle, sweetheart, such a darling, Christina Bullock had said. But, we don't eat chitlins. The fuck? It's not. It was foolish of Estelle, attempting to explain she'd brought chicken wings, lemon pepper, and cognac glazed. She regretted that very much after Christina Bullock and her hee-heeing pack walked off mid-sentence. Basic ass bitch, one of the hyenas had muttered, walking away. Ma, who you talking to? Marcus's voice yanked Estelle back to a hot car idling at a red light. He was giving her the side-eyed gaze, and she didn't appreciate it one bit. Marcus, what I say about sticking your nose in other people's business? You the one talking to yourself, cussing and stuff. I ain't asked to hear this. Estelle caught a glance of the handbag, proudly hanging from her arm earlier that evening, now on his lap, sitting in the front seat with all her valuables inside. The LV monogram emblazoned in italics across dark checker print leather, Louis in cursive on one side, and goddamn Vuitton on the other. I'm driving, she shouted. This my car. I want to talk to myself, and that's what I does. Well, the AC won't work, and you out here looking crazy with me in the car next to you. What if my friends see? Crazy? You just called the woman cooking your dinner crazy? The one who talked your fake handbag behind daddy into putting you up in that Hasidic ass school in the hills? Is that who you caught yourself calling crazy? When Marcus started laughing, Estelle warned, 12 ain't too grown to get your ass beat. You remember that. The light turned green, and as Estelle and Marcus crossed Slauson Ave, she sighed. Your goddamn daddy.
I don't know if you see the hand claps, but I think it's a hit. I think.
Thank you.
When I read this, many other short stories came to mind. The Necklace by Guy de, I always have a problem with his last name, Maupassant, about social ambition and materialism. The Lesson by Tony Bambara, taking the kids from the Bronx to Manhattan to the FAO Schwartz toy store to talk about the difference in living and expenses. How do you think, or what is the toll you think that this material social ambition has on families?
So I think it part and parcel, it's almost trying to keep up with the Joneses in a sense. I always tell people I didn't know I was poor until I saw what other people had, right? And I think that's often the struggle that you see with families of color who are trying to get ahead. Sometimes you see that what they define as success is having what we see people of affluence have, right? And I think it often makes for a tricky kind of interaction when we enter spaces we're not too familiar with.
And what do you think it says about I guess, our mental health, our mental state, not only just for Estelle, but also for Marcus and T? You have the husband who's doing his best, and he didn't see anything wrong with buying it from his hookup.
Yeah,
You want this bag? A bag is a bag. Like,
yeah, it's a funny thing that takes place in this story because Estella's completely fine with the bag until someone says something to her about it, right? And I think that's where the conflict for her comes in, and it's a very relatable type of thing, right? We don't know we're wearing an ugly sweater until someone says, I don't like your sweater, right? So it's that idea that she's entering this space where she is kind of alien, right? She doesn't belong in Beverly Hills. She's not from Beverly Hills, right? And there's a sort of violence of her being interpreted, as oh, I see you for what you are, right? The fact that the bag is being used as this instrument to cast her as other is what she finds so offensive, so jarring.
thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And as the audience continues to listen, as you populate questions, please remember to put them in the Q&A so that when we get to the end, we can go back and ask other questions. The next reader is Glass Gal.
Oh, peace, people. Peace, good people. It's good to be here. Um, what an honor. Thank you, Black Lawrence Press. Thank you to my fellow artists. Feels like we've been in communication for years, and so I'm really just excited that this business come to fruition. This was a surprise. I just want to give a preface to this piece. Um, I'm often writing poetry, and that's my ground. And then I started writing sentences. That's what I keep telling people. I started writing sentences, and this came out. So this is actually a dedication to my mother, and in honor of her, and as well as many people who are suffering now. I would like to spend the first minute in silence. I will keep the time so that we can honor those people who may not have had a voice, may not have a voice during this time, and also time moving forward. Starting time. Thank you. Justice for the dead. When Black women create generational wealth, there is a hope for continuance, but the reality is the slate is cleaned each time. In a Caribbean family, you never know the wealth of a West Indian woman. Things are often held in secret and without explanation. If only that were enough to create security. I once knew a West Indian woman who was free. She was free to sit on church stairs after midnight with her child blanketed over her shoulder after being chased by her abuser spouse. She'd be free to get licks and later spread her legs for his demands of her body. She'd be free to play numbers, bet on horses, and enter any raffle she wanted. No one was going to tell her her black eyes, bruises, swollen lips, or lacerations were anything but beautiful. The rouge she would spread to her lips and cheeks matched her blood, and the mask dabbed to the sides of her neck would waft away any hint of fear. She was that kind of free. She accepted that kind of freedom for two reasons. One, she had the strength of any man and was from a lineage of fighters. Thus, she could fight back and therefore endure. And two, there were no protections for a domestic violence victim. As a matter of fact, domestic violence is a part of a marriage, wasn't it? Justice for the perpetrator was a slap on the wrist and a release. At least she was free from the legacy of being a spinster. That same West Indian woman knew the rules weren't meant for a Black woman, but rather to keep her in her place. She made her own rules. Do until you're told otherwise. Black women know when other Black women are struggling and try to offer refuge. A veteran Black woman offered her home to this West Indian woman in her will, leaving off the name of her spouse. A fresh start. In turn, the West Indian woman created her will to bequeath her estate to her only child. 20 years before her death, 10 years before her memory began to fade. Even when Black women have their papers, T's crossed, and I's dotted, the most concrete dissolves. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't know if you knew you had the full 7 minutes too.
I do,
Okay,
but I didn't want to read the whole
okay,
chapter. Thank
gotcha.
you.
Okay, I was just like, okay. I was just like, okay. Just didn't want you to, okay. Um, This was short, but it was hard. Uh, it was quite painful. In fact, I remember reading this over and over because I love poetry, and so I picked up on Girl, I think Jamaica Kincaid, if I'm not, no. Girl, yeah, okay. I picked up on that in here, and it may have been when you mentioned West Indies, and my head just kind of associated with other Caribbean women writers, and so I was um plagued by this question though about when you said at least she was free of the legacy of the spinster, almost like being married at is better than being single at any cost. Is that something you felt your mother learned, or is that continues to be the way of the West Indies?
I think that I can't speak to all for the West Indies. I grew up in a family from Trinidad mostly. But what I can say is that, um, and grew up Catholic as well. I think that marriage is held in high regard, right? And when you enter the mind of the person who, I'm speaking of, marriage was very important. It meant maybe upward mobility. It meant you're at the highest notch of the Catholic Church, and aside from being a nun, there's status that comes with marriage, and there's also something healing that comes with, or potential healing that can come with marriage, but it often doesn't work out that way.
And it doesn't seem like the church was much of a refuge either, or was it?
Absolutely not. I think that this, and I'm a person of faith, I just want to say that of many faiths. But this was a time in the early 80s, around the time, I think there were some um, vandalism that occurred in the Catholic churches around that time, and they decided that they wanted to protect the artifacts in the church, and so they started locking the church. Churches weren't always locked. You used to be able to go there for refuge, and we didn't live very far from the church. So I just remember, I don't know, I don't remember there was an announcement, but she would always go there, and she was a late night worker, so she was accustomed to going to church late. And this particular time, the doors were locked. And we later learned that this was part of the reason. Mhm.
I like the notion where you said that Black women know when other Black women are struggling and try to offer refuge, but it seemed like that offer did not help as the giver intended. That it still, yeah.
You're still working within a system, right? So, I mean, I grew up in Staten Island. Staten Island is a very conservative, and it was really conservative when I was growing up. So you're in a very conservative borough. The laws are not necessarily in your favor, even when you do things right. So she had her business in order. However, the sanctity of marriage, and a heterosexual marriage at that, is held supreme. And I don't think that people are often aware of, just because you're married or just because you might indicate what your wishes are, that your wishes can be honored. Now, if she was a man, would that be different? Perhaps. But I just thought that that was a very interesting scenario. Hmm.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hmm.
And our last reader will be Yvette Green.
Hello, everybody. It's so great to be here and great to listen to the other writers and hear your voices kind of bring your work alive. My piece is called Reading Between the Text Boxes. And if you've seen the text on the page, there are actual kind of text boxes to, I guess, demonstrate what one might see on the phone, but also to kind of help this bring to life, I guess, this idea of reading between the text boxes, reading between the lines, reading what may not have been said. Early on a Saturday morning, a few days after George Floyd was killed and the streets responded in pain, I received this text message from a well-meaning white friend. I'm really sorry you have to go through this, and try to explain it to your sons without creating hate and fear. He neglected a period where he should have shut up. After the words, I'm sorry. He presumed to know what I was thinking or feeling. And if I wasn't thinking, how do I explain this without creating hate or fear, then the implication was those were the thoughts I should be wrestling with. I hadn't reached out. I didn't ask him to lend me his ear. He was not my countryman in these excruciating moments of vile racism and Black rage. In this moment, he was the other, yet he sought an opportunity to speak. A year prior, I had broken up with a guy I was seeing. My feelings were hurt, and I was convinced love would ever be evasive, in spite of what a gift I was. As I shared my feelings about this new loss, this friend said, when you're ready for it, you will have love. I kindly told him, let's stop texting right now. I felt to say that is the dumbest, cruelest shit. How is anyone not ready for love? What is the standard for being ready? And who says something like that? You don't have love because you're not ready for it? He continued to text despite my requests because the conversation had become about him. I eventually sent him something about compassionate listening and slowly started backing away from this friendship. In this present moment in 2020, this white man's decision to initiate interaction with the Black mother of 2 Black boys regarding the death of a Black man by a white system should have been handled with care, if at all. To step forward unprovoked and say, I'm sorry you have to explain without creating fear and hate is a white, masculine, patriarchal act. I thought, this is about you and this white male space you are privileged to occupy and speak from with a degree of authoritativeness. This is part of the system that is oppressive. It was as though he was saying it was my job to combat American voices and pain and fear and hatred. Yet America had created the need for us to take to the streets again and again. America did this. There was nothing for me to explain. My children can see clearly what this country is and what this country thinks of them by how it treats its Black citizens. And they are afraid, and I am afraid. I chose my words carefully, specifically for him. I knew he meant no harm, despite how I felt about his message and this apology I didn't need. I responded as gracefully as I could. Thanks, I can't explain it. Fear has always been there. It won't go anywhere. It'll likely just grow. My children are marked. I didn't text, my Black sons are marked. And you have no idea what that feels like. The fear knots in my shoulders and streams from my tear ducts. The anger threatens my sense of self. My own lack of power to protect my children is debilitating. But to extend grace further to him, I added, I did buy my youngest a keyboard, and I'm looking at virtual summer opportunities. I can't combat what is real. Then I sent him a video of this child's attempts at playing Ode to Joy, because this was me being kind and thinking about what I would do for my son. And this was me refusing to engage in a conversation where it was my responsibility to change how my children viewed a country that would never be post-racial, that strengthened cops to kill Black people with ease. Because I needed to redirect the conversation to commonalities, the one in which we build our children up. But the conversation was his. That is the best. I'd like to have a soundtrack of your son playing his halting, careful version of Ode to Joy as a background to the protests. Had I not been clear prior, I was uber clear now. This is not about me, a Black mother of Black boys. This is about a white man in the comfort of his white gaze, in the comfort of his white space, gazing on the story of our country, personified in cities as people scream to be heard. I stopped conversing. I didn't breathe. I tensed up, grew angrier. I realized I had wasted my precious energy on this exchange. It was time to let him out. That season was up. One of my last relationships with a white person had been put to death by my need to fully show up, to fully be seen, to fully be cared for in relationships. I was tired of prancing around my Blackness to ensure his comfort. I held onto my energy and said to myself, if you feel your thoughts are superior to mine, in a world that values you as a white man exceedingly, abundantly, more than it values me as a Black woman, then I am no longer interested in hearing your thoughts, and you do not deserve my grace.
Thank you. Thank you. Your short story, there was something in like all of the stories that were read that resonated with me personally. I have two sons as well. And you repeated this statement that he did not mean harm. I knew he meant no harm. Do you still believe he meant no harm?
That's a good question. I do think that the white gaze and that power becomes so internalized that there may be an involuntary harm. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that, but I do definitely think that the gaze and white supremacy can be very internalized and almost subconscious. I do think it was selfish, and so maybe in being selfish, there is an aspect of being harmful.
What tips do you have for parents? Because it's an exhausting conversation with people, and they're not listening. Like you can just keep going, and you can just tell the eye returns, as fast as they say, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," and then it's eye something, and it's like, okay, you're not listening. What tips have you, or how have you coped? Maybe that's a better question.
Oh, I'm still learning. I'm still learning. I definitely think it depends on the situation, and there is that aspect of having to kind of ball up your fist and push a voice out of you that you may not be used to pushing out of you, to say, to remark, or to say something, or to stop the conversation, or to put your hand up, or if you can do that. Excuse me. And if you can't, or you're not ready, then it may be to have the conversation with someone else to get it out of your system.
Thank you. Thank you. So at this time, we would like for the readers to, if they have comments or questions of each other, to unmute and ask their question. Or not. And so we can open it up to the audience if there are questions. I see chats. Okay. Are there any questions from the audience to any author? Okay. Catherine said they were profound. So people have praise, but currently no additional questions. I did notice as I was reading through, it was in search of our mother's garden, came up for me, Everyday Use by Alice Walker. A lot of Alice Walker kind of resonated with me throughout these stories. Who would you say as an author kind of influenced your writings? As many
For any of us or all of us?
Yeah, for any of you. Yeah, I mean, because as the conversation about African American AP being removed, those lists of great authors, books to read, like having them find their way into the hands of our youth, all youth. But just curious, who were some of your writers of note?
I can offer one response, but I'd love to hear everyone else's as well. I'm a huge fan of Roxane Gay, and I've read her stuff for years, and she's just an amazing writer. And what I really took from her work is combining pop culture and cultural criticism with memoir or with essay writing. You know, I'd never, before Bad Feminist came out, it was rare that I read, you know, pieces about things that were happening, you know, currently, like in the times. And I'll never forget when I read her essay, she wrote a letter to Chris Brown, or a letter to people who want Chris Brown to like love them or something like that. It was basically, she was responding to Chris Brown's physical assault of Rihanna. And it was just so nice to read something current and something that, you know, was going on in the times. And, you know, she's a very revered author. By that point, she had written, I think, 2 other books. And so I was just happy to like read that and to also just feel like she was accessible to main people. You know, she's very literary and very highly respected, but she's also just, you know, she said in a podcast once that her favorite song is like Shake It Like a Salt Shaker. I just really appreciated that. And it made me want to have that kind of writing too, that's accessible and that's speaking to the moment.
In my essay, I mentioned, and I just didn't include it in the reading, a poem by Natasha Trethewey. And there's a moment when people are attempting to respond to her about her mother's death. And she writes this poem, and she's so graceful with people's lazy words or their laziness in terms of responding. Um, and I love the gracefulness and the thoughtfulness, as well as the conciseness and the beauty of her writing. She is one of my favorites, and I'm nowhere near that, but she is one of those writers that I look towards.
I would like to say that I am inspired by I Love Jasmine Ward, Alice Walker, Zora Neale Hurston, mainly because these are Southern authors. And so many times we read books about the South and the dialect isn't there. And I wanted, you know, to catch that essence because you know, those of us that are from Alabama, we have a distinctive way we sound. And I wanted to capture that in my writing, just as Jasmine Ward captures the AAVE, the African American Vernacular English, and Alice Walker and Zora Neale Hurston. So I am inspired by those great authors.
I appreciate as an ancestor, Audre Lorde, um, just her ability to use the personal as political and also intersectional. Um, and as more current, Edwige Dantekamp. Um, I love. I could just read that forever, read it forever. But also just visual art. I really appreciate visual art as a way of engaging conversation around um, complex issues. Like Joyce C. Scott just did a retrospective exhibit, and it just speaks. It just love of visual representation. It really helps to prompt further storytelling for me.
Thank you for those suggestions, and thanks for putting your author names in the chat. I see that Ms. Brooks did that. If you feel so enlightened, you can also include your authors there. As this section dealt with mind and there's different ways to interpret mind. You know, there's peace of mind, like I'm gonna give you a piece of my mind, like I keep thinking of Estelle, right? And then there's peace that we should protect against all intruders. People who intend us harm are not people with good intentions. Just how to navigate moving forward for many in our audience who may have other people they want to share some advice or tidbits to or tips to. What would you say about mental health currently? It could be personal, it could relate to your story or relate to something you want to get across in your story about mind and protecting one's mental health.
Well, I can contribute to that. So many times as African Americans, we're told to just hold everything in, and there's a big taboo about us seeing therapists and taking care of ourselves. And it took a lot of me to share my story, but it was cathartic as well. So I challenge everyone to, I'm not saying to publish, you know, your vulnerabilities in an anthology like I did, but um, don't feel like you're alone as if you cannot, because pressure pressure bust pipes. So you can't just hold things in, and you need some type of confidant. And if you don't feel like you can speak with someone, talk to God, journal. Definitely don't hold things in and expect things to go away. You have to deal with those emotions, um, however you choose to deal with them, whether you want to write or draw or sketch. You have to find some type of way to release all of your anxieties.
I would add to that, just because I straddle both spaces, I'm also a somatic psychologist, so I feel like I should be a proponent, but not in the Western way. So I just also want to say to like my Black and also Caribbean folk across the diaspora, yeah, I grew up. Everyone thinks I'm a very strange bee, having all my business all day out here, but it's true. I mean, so much is held in our bodies, and I think that that was part of my entry is to like really come back to the body and really come back to what it really means to take care of your mental health. You're taking care of your spirit. And I find that when I was able to talk about it in that way, then more of my family members, other people were able to come on board to like talk about like, yeah, we care about our spirit. Like we want to regardless of your faith, we care about the health of our spirit and our purpose. And so this kind of helps to also bring all of you forward. There's so much I know, and I can only speak about Caribbean culture because it lands different, but there's just so much performativity about in Caribbean culture, proximity to whiteness. There's so much that gets internalized that we don't realize that we're holding, and then also treating ourselves in a particular kind of way. Also speaking to our other brothers and sisters in a particular kind of way. But it's all coming from that space of trauma, and we're repeating things. And so, if we really want to be free, we have to have our spirits be free. So, I really encourage people to um, yeah, to engage in the release. I appreciate you, Larissa, and speaking in that way.
Yes, I completely agree, Dr. Glasgow. And just like Caribbean culture, Southern culture is definitely that way. I think that we get it real bad down here in the South. There's a certain way you're expected to be, and there's certain things that are taboo, and you don't put your business in the streets, and it's all type of taboo things. And sometimes you just cannot hold those things in. I know society expects us to be a certain way, but uh, those things need to be released, whether through a therapist, through God, like I said, through drawing or writing. We definitely don't need to hold in too much, because as Black people, I mean, I don't know the statistics. I hate to I mean, it's broadly known that Black people are at high risk for heart disease. So we definitely don't want to carry, and we always have to, we're expected to be super women and super men, but that may come as a cost, and we just have to take care of ourselves, especially our minds.
I couldn't agree more with both of you, with Marissa and Dr. Glasgow. And Dr. Glasgow, can you drop a link if you do any remote somatic work? Because I'm interested. I was just going to add that, and a little bit of it's reminding me of the question that Dr. West White asked me in the beginning, and I think self-acceptance is a really big part of it. I think we should just accept who we are and not try to be anything but, who we are. And I think for me, when it came to this whole dancing thing, I just sort of accepted that I don't have to be a great dancer. I'm not doing it professionally, so I don't it's not like it's my livelihood. And I'm good at other things, and those things are special too. I play basketball, and not everybody can play basketball. So um, just trying to realize that, there are a lot of things that people expect us to be, as Marissa was saying, as Dr. Glasgow was saying, and we don't have to be those things. You should be who you are. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't fit in the stereotype of what a Black woman is supposed to be. You can make your own.
I think I would just maybe like to add developing a practice. And so it could, be that practice of exercise or be the practice of, that 5-minute meditation in the morning on a regular basis or in the evening on a regular basis. Or, I think it might have been Ophelia, you might have mentioned like you had a chant that you said to yourself.
Right.
Yeah, so whether it's saying a specific group of words that helps you to reframe or to build yourself up, um, or prayer, just some practice that's consistent that helps you get out in the world and deal with the world.
I attended a conference that our university puts on last year, and one of the speakers spoke about the Great Migration, and she studied people, African Americans who left the South to go north, not because of racial violence, but because their little country southern towns made them feel as unwelcome as any white gaze or attack ever could. And I've been trying to chase down her writing and her research ever since. I write it down and forget to follow up, but that is very unique. I think when we think of unique cultures, sometimes the South gets such a negative connotation that we don't sometimes see ourselves as sometimes as a separate entity. Like, we are different, and it's okay to be different. I appreciate you saying that, Marissa. We have a couple more minutes, and I still don't see any questions from the audience, but people have placed works in the chat. So be sure to follow up with those. Is there does anyone have any last thoughts or advice about what to do or how not to get caught? I have not heard from Kay Farrell Dalrymple. So I keep looking over because how my screen is, you're like in this corner. And so I'm curious of your thoughts, because yours had a sense of humor to it, but it was just some very serious undertones. This notion of having to send your children away from your community to get the education they deserve. I mean, because then that speaks to that education system not being up to par, although that's where your taxes are, because she's not paying taxes in, Beverly Hills. And so this materialism, this social climbing, this notion of wanting our children to not only be better and go further, but to definitely have more social mobility. And I'm thinking those cracks in our psyche happen daily in those types of environment.
Yeah, for me, one of the things I experienced growing up is, seeing the Black women in my life, the Black women who raised me, sort of, have to self-sacrifice for their children to push their children forward, right? And it's one of those things that it's a very thankless kind of sacrifice, and the mere thanklessness of it, it's a jarring kind of thing. So it's one of the things I wanted to explore, because this is a story that it demands that you look beyond the surface. It demands that you see Estelle for more than what a glance or a gaze might tell you about her. And I think for Black women in general, when you're going through these spaces, people tend to put you in this box, right? And this box is full with every perception that makes them feel comfortable speaking with you, makes them feel comfortable interacting with you, and we start to sort of conform to that because we don't want to come across as the angry Black woman or the overconfident Black woman. So um, it's just really important, I think, to know who you are and be confident in who you are. And that's something that I think, if anything, Estelle teaches us in her inability to code switch, because that's one of the things that one of the characteristics that I played with is she doesn't know how to code switch, right? And a part of that is she's held on to this identity that I think is beautiful.
Yeah, I like to add to that, Mr. Dare, I don't want to mess your name up, Mr. Darewimple.
There you go. I'll take it.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot of Vershawn Young's work. The book he wrote, Not Your Average NIGGA, when he talks about being an academic and in these white spaces. Myself, I teach at 2 PWIs, and sometimes that can be challenging, having to code switch. And that goes back to what we were saying about mental health. It definitely takes a great deal of emotional intelligence to navigate those spaces. And, I teach at the University of Alabama. That was everybody looked at the University of Alabama in their textbooks growing up, staying in the schoolhouse door. So just, just to know the culture that comes behind the university. So I deal with so many different things, in that environment as a Black woman, as a Black academic. So that just, when I heard you speaking, that just reminded me how much emotional intelligence it takes for us as Black people, especially those of us that are academics, that have to tread lightly in these spaces. Sometimes we find ourselves being insecure about our research, because there are times where I have to present my research in front of a room full of white people. And, sometimes, that can definitely work on your mental health. So we never understand how important code switching is until we just have to deal with the reality of it. And sometimes it's emotionally exhausting to have to code switch.
Yeah, there's a violence to it, right? And that, the mere act of doing it is almost like having to justify your reason for being in a particular space. A lot of people call it imposter syndrome, but I think it digs deeper than that. It's we talk about mental health. It is a mentally exhausting thing. I've been in spaces where when I leave, I am just tired, and I don't know why, I don't do construction. I sit at a computer all day, but it's just, you know, having to butcher a part of ourselves to make people feel comfortable existing in the same space as us is something that I wanted to rebel against in writing this story. Whether whether you whether how Estelle spoke made you feel uncomfortable, whether it was her use of obscenities that made you feel uncomfortable, or the way or whatever it may be, uh, that's okay. You know, like it's okay to be who you are. It's okay for a Black woman to be upset if something is upsetting to her. Like you don't have to swallow it. You shouldn't be in a space. A space is not an inclusive space if you have to kill a part of who you are, kill how you genuinely feel to be in that space. And I think it's less so to do with us and more so to do with the society that we live in that is okay with that, with doing that to a community of people.
Thank you so much for that. I was going to bring up the imposter syndrome as well. So, which is dumbfounding to me. How many academics I speak to who feel that way of her shared, they felt imposter syndrome and they have 50 degrees and have had 20 jobs, overqualified for everything on every work site, job site, you know, but still feel like, no, I'm not good enough for this. It is mind-boggling how these things penetrate our souls and spirits. But thankful that you have these stories to kind of help us combat it when we need to refresh and find out other ways to deal with our problems and our mental unease. So thank you all for your contributions to this section of the book. I enjoyed reading them. I enjoyed hearing you read them. I think our audience enjoyed you reading them as well. So continue writing, and thank you for participating.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much,
And I
students.
enjoyed
Thank
all
you.
of you guys' work as well. Thank you.